In the vast, unpredictable waters of the Bering Sea, where even the most seasoned sailors have witnessed events beyond explanation, an extraordinary story unfolded, one that would forever change the understanding of human-animal connections. It all began on a crisp spring morning when the sea lay eerily still. Captain Michael Anderson, a third-generation fisherman with decades of experience, sensed something unusual. The ocean, usually restless with waves, had calmed to an unnatural stillness. He had learned over the years that such silence often preceded something remarkable. As his crew of four went about their usual work, hauling in the morning's catch, a sudden movement in the water caught the attention of first mate Sarah Collins. She blinked, thinking she was imagining things. But there it was, a massive brown bear struggling in the open sea, far from any visible land. Seeing a bear in the water was not unheard of, but this one was different. It wasn't swimming towards shore or thrashing in panic. Instead, it floated in place, keeping its eyes locked onto their vessel. It was as if the animal was waiting for something, its gaze filled with an eerie intelligence that none of them had ever seen in a wild creature before. As they observed, the bear did something even more unexpected. It raised one massive paw above the water, a movement so deliberate and precise that it resembled a human signal for help. The captain and his crew exchanged uneasy glances. Wild animals usually acted on instinct, reacting with either aggression or desperation in distress. This bear, however, was different. It wasn't trying to swim away or fight against the current. Instead, it adjusted its position whenever the boat moved, keeping itself aligned with them as if it understood that they were its only chance of survival. Captain Anderson, despite his years at sea, had never seen anything like it. Skepticism warred with curiosity as he decided they couldn't just leave the creature behind. Jack Reynolds, the ship's engineer, quickly began modifying one of their largest fishing nets, hoping it could support the bear's weight. As they prepared for the rescue, the animal continued to watch them intently, its eyes moving from one crew member to another, as if memorizing their faces. When they made their first attempt, the net failed. The bear was too heavy, and the material couldn't support its massive form. The crew braced themselves, expecting the bear to react with panic, but instead, it did the opposite. It remained calm, treading water patiently, almost as if it understood they were trying to help. On the second attempt, something even more incredible happened. The bear rolled to its side, making it easier for the net to slip beneath its body. Sarah, who had worked with marine mammals before, was astonished. No wild animal she had ever seen had displayed such cooperation. It was as if the bear understood their rescue efforts and was assisting them. When they finally managed to lift the bear out of the water, it remained perfectly still, not struggling or thrashing as they expected. As it was hoisted onto the deck, water streaming from its fur, it met the gaze of each crew member one by one. There was no fear in its eyes, no hostility, only something that felt eerily like understanding. The crew stood in stunned silence as the bear slowly got to its feet. The moment stretched, tense with uncertainty. Then the animal did something that defied all logic. It raised a massive paw to its chest, holding it there for a moment before extending it toward Captain Anderson. The movement was unmistakable, a gesture of gratitude. Sarah gasped, dropping the tranquilizer gun she had instinctively picked up. Jack took an involuntary step back. They had all heard stories of wild animals displaying intelligence. But this was different. This was something beyond instinct. This was deliberate communication. The surreal nature of the moment deepened when one of the crew members, Tom Martinez, slipped on the wet deck while backing away. Before anyone could react, the bear moved swiftly, positioning itself between Tom and the ship's railing, preventing him from falling overboard. Tom reached out instinctively, gripping the thick fur for balance. Once he steadied himself, the bear stepped back, as if it had done nothing out of the ordinary. For the next few hours, the bear continued to defy every expectation. When the ship's engine began making unusual noises, the bear pawed at a specific spot on the deck. Jack investigated and, to his shock, discovered a damaged fuel line directly beneath the area the bear had indicated. If left unchecked, it could have led to a serious problem. It was as if the bear had sensed something even the experienced crew had overlooked. Later that afternoon, a sudden storm approached. The waves grew larger, and the ship rocked violently. As the crew scrambled to secure loose equipment, the bear moved with them, using its sheer strength to help hold down heavy crates that threatened to break free. At one point, a large wooden crate became dislodged and was about to crash into the ship's control room. Before anyone could react, the bear caught it with its powerful arms, holding it in place long enough for the crew to secure it properly. Even more astonishing was what happened when a container of fresh water was left open on the deck. The bear approached it, but didn't drink immediately. Instead, it nudged the container toward the crew, waiting until each of them had taken a sip before drinking itself. This was not just intelligence, it was consideration, something no one had ever thought possible from a wild bear. As the day wore on, the crew's fear gave way to wonder. They no longer saw a wild animal on their deck. They saw a being that defied everything they thought they knew. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the bear performed one final act that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. It began picking up small fish from their catch and tossing them to the seabirds circling overhead. But it wasn't random. Each toss was deliberate, ensuring that different birds got their share. Captain Anderson, a man known for his skepticism, found himself sitting beside the bear, speaking to it as if it were another member of his crew. To his astonishment, the bear reacted, tilting its head at certain words, making low, rumbling sounds in response. It was as if it understood the conversation, responding not just to tone, but to meaning. By the time the Northern Star approached the shoreline where they intended to release the bear, the crew was no longer thinking about simply returning an animal to the wild. They were saying goodbye to something that had profoundly changed them. Then, just as the boat neared land, the bear did something that shattered every remaining doubt about its intelligence. Using its wet paw, it began making deliberate marks on the deck. At first, they thought it was random scratching, but as they watched, they realized the bear was drawing something. It was mapping the coastline ahead, marking certain spots with X's. When they compared it to their navigation charts, they felt chills run down their spines. The bear's markings corresponded exactly with dangerous underwater rocks, ones that were not visible from the surface. Captain Anderson, trusting the impossible, adjusted their course accordingly. Later, when they checked their original route, they discovered that it would have led them straight into a dangerous reef. The bear had just saved their ship. Still reeling from what they had witnessed, the crew lowered a ramp for the bear to leave. It walked halfway down but then turned back. Slowly, it approached the captain, carrying a small piece of wood that had broken off during the storm. With deliberate movements, it used its claws to carve something into the surface. When it finished, it placed the wood into Anderson's hands. The crew gathered around, staring at the rough yet unmistakable carving. It was a drawing of their boat, surrounded by 5 marks representing the crew and a larger mark for the bear, all connected in a circle. They had rescued the bear, but somehow it had rescued them in return. As the bear finally stepped off the ship and onto the shore, the crew of the Northern Star watched in silence. None of them spoke, too overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of what had just transpired. The bear, their bear, had left them with something far greater than just an unforgettable experience. It had left them with proof that intelligence, communication, and even compassion were not exclusive to humans. The bear walked a few paces onto the sand before turning back one last time. It raised its paw once more, holding it over its heart, then extended it outward in the same gesture of gratitude it had made earlier. And then, without hesitation, it disappeared into the dense forest beyond the shoreline, leaving the crew with a strange emptiness, as if they had just said goodbye to an old friend. For days, the events aboard the Northern Star dominated the conversations of the crew. Each sailor, hardened by years at sea, found themselves questioning everything they had believed about the natural world. Sarah Collins, who had spent years studying marine mammals, tried to rationalize what had happened. Could it have been some form of learned behavior? Was it possible that this bear had encountered humans before, in a way that shaped its interactions? But none of the explanations made sense. No bear had ever exhibited the level of understanding and cooperation they had witnessed. News of their encounter spread quickly. The moment they docked at port, rumors swirled about a bear that had not only been rescued by fishermen, but had actively participated in its own survival. Wildlife authorities and researchers arrived to interview the crew, but no one could offer a concrete explanation. Then, 3 days after they had released the bear, something happened that made the entire world take notice. The Northern Star had returned to its usual fishing grounds when they spotted something unusual in the distance. A gathering of fishing boats had formed a loose circle, their crews pointing excitedly at the water. As Captain Anderson steered closer, his heart began to pound. There, swimming toward them with a confidence that defied logic, was the bear. But it was not alone. Following closely behind it was a pod of orcas, their sleek bodies cutting through the water in perfect unison. Above them, seabirds circled in an organized formation, creating patterns in the sky. And most astonishing of all, two other bears, smaller but just as at ease in the water, swam alongside it. The Northern Star crew stood frozen as their bear approached, its familiar gaze locked onto them. But this time, it was not merely seeking help, it was leading something. As the bear reached their boat, it did something extraordinary. It swam to the side of the vessel, then reached up with its massive paw, tapping the hull gently, deliberately. A request, a greeting, an acknowledgement. The orcas behind it surfaced, exhaling in perfect synchronization, sending mist into the air like a ceremonial display. The seabirds dipped lower, forming shifting patterns in the sky. And the two new bears, now only a few feet from the boat, watched with the same eerie intelligence that had first captured the crew's attention. It was as if the bear had returned, not just to reconnect, but to introduce them to something greater. Sarah, hands trembling, grabbed her phone and began recording. The footage would later go viral, shocking the world. What they captured that day was not just an animal returning to its rescuers, it was an orchestrated display of interspecies coordination. As the minutes passed, the bear moved with clear intention. It gestured toward the other bears, and almost immediately, they mimicked the same movements it had learned aboard the ship. They raised their paws in unison, mirroring the gestures of gratitude the first bear had made. The orcas in response began to move in a wide circular formation around the boats, their rhythmic surfacing creating a pattern that looked almost choreographed. Then came the most shocking moment of all. The bear reached into the water, pulling up an object held delicately in its powerful jaws. It swam closer to the boat and, with the utmost care, placed the item on the deck. It was a collection of perfect seashells, each one pristine, and more astonishingly, each one a color that matched the clothing the crew had been wearing on the day of the rescue. Captain Anderson knelt down, picking up one of the shells in disbelief. He turned it over in his hands, the weight of its meaning sinking in. The bear hadn't just remembered them, it had remembered the details of that day, down to the colors they wore. The crew exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism shattered. This was not coincidence. It was not instinct. It was something else entirely. And then, as if this display had not been incredible enough, the bear did something that would be studied by scientists and storytellers alike for years to come. It took a step back and let out a series of deep rhythmic vocalizations, sounds that to the crew's ears were unlike any bear noises they had ever heard. To their shock, the orcas responded. The sounds echoed across the water, carrying a strange, almost melodic quality. The orcas answered with their own series of calls, the pattern eerily synchronized with the bear's vocalizations. For the next several minutes, the crew of the Northern Star bore witness to something that should have been impossible. The bear and the orcas were communicating. The realization sent chills down their spines. Whatever this bear had become, it was no longer just an ordinary wild animal. It had crossed some unseen boundary, one that no scientist had ever truly considered possible. And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the moment ended. The bear turned to leave, gesturing for the others to follow. The two younger bears obeyed immediately, slipping beneath the waves as naturally as if they had been born to the sea. The orcas dipped below the surface, disappearing into the deep. The seabirds, as if signaled, scattered into the sky. Before vanishing completely, the bear turned back one final time. It raised its paw over its heart, just as it had done before. And then it was gone. The crew of the Northern Star stood in silence, the weight of what they had just witnessed settling over them. Captain Anderson, a man who had spent his entire life at sea, found himself gripping the railing to steady himself. He had always believed in the power of nature, but this was something else. In the weeks that followed, news of the encounter spread like wildfire. Scientists, marine biologists, and animal behaviorists scrambled to make sense of it. The footage recorded by Sarah became the subject of countless debates. Some called it a fluke, a bizarre anomaly. Others believed it to be the most compelling evidence yet that animals were capable of much more than humans had ever given them credit for. But for the crew of the Northern Star, there was no question. They knew what they had seen. They had looked into the eyes of something extraordinary, something that had changed them forever. And as the years passed, stories continued to surface. Fishermen reported seeing the bear again, always accompanied by new creatures, always displaying acts of intelligence that defied logic. Some claimed it had helped guide lost whales back to their migration routes. Others swore it had appeared before storms, warning boats to seek shelter. The legend of the bear grew, but for those who had stood on the deck of the Northern Star that day, it was never just a legend. It was a reality. And somewhere, in the vast, endless waters of the Bering Sea, the bear still swam, watching, learning, and perhaps waiting for the next moment when fate would bring it back to those who had once saved its life.